We're now going to move into the media panel, Al-Jazeera versus YouTube. Emma Deputy, the representative from Americans for Reform Democracy, will be moderating the panel. But before we start, really guys, y'all need to move up. We can't have the two front rows empty. We can't have people dialogue. There's about a 20-foot distance between everyone. So I encourage you, especially those of you in the back or along the side, please just come on up. It's going to be a great panel. Thank you.
Hello everyone. We'd like to begin our very first panel discussion of today on entitled Al-Jazeera versus YouTube Changes in Mass Media. Can everyone hear me? Okay. It's entitled Al-Jazeera versus YouTube Changes in Mass Media, and we have three fabulous panelists here today. We have Ms. Saleh, who is a correspondent for BBC. And we also have Welch, who works for Soliya, which is a communication facilitating program. And we have Ms. Ethar El-Katatney, who is a reporter for Egypt Today and a very prominent blogger and also an AC alumnus. So we're going to get the panel rolling. The format of the panel is going to be 4 set questions that have been written by the organizing committee, and each panelist will have the chance to answer each of these questions. And then we're going to open up the panel so that you guys can ask questions from the audience. So let's get it started. Okay, our very first question, which if you'd like to answer this first, Ms. Saleh, is explain the form of journalism that you work in and discuss its role in the future of social engagement.
I'm a radio journalist. Closer.
Closer for the translation, please.
Okay, just one minute. Okay. I'm a radio and print journalist. It is very traditional old media. I work for the BBC, and I also write for a newspaper. I'm a freelance journalist. Yeah, I think everyone knows BBC World Service, probably heard it. It's got a reputation established over decades. Like all traditional media, we're facing some competition from new media. We're no longer necessarily always the people who have the information first, but I think we pride ourselves on being the people who can be organizations that can mediate all what's out there in the world on the internet and present it in ways that are digestible.
Thank you very much. Okay, I hope I didn't do that. Thank you very much. Mr. Welch, would you care to answer the second question?
Sure. Does everyone can hear me okay? So, I probably should give a little bit more background to what it is precisely we do. I think the BBC has a little more name recognition than Soliya. At first impression, our work probably doesn't sound like journalism, but I'd like to talk a little bit about why I think there are significant implications to what we are doing towards the future of not journalism, at least the way people get their information. So at Soliya, the core program that we're running right now is called the Connect program. And basically what that is a cross-cultural education initiative that enables the type of track-3 diplomacy that Dr. Welch was describing before. It enables people from across the United States, Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, to communicate through a web-based video conferencing application, to communicate in depth about the issues that currently divide us, and enable us to talk about those issues, both the really politically divisive issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or Iraq, but also what you did last weekend and what music you listened to. So we're really focused on trying to both have a discussion about the political level, but also build these strong interpersonal relationships. And we're doing that now through universities across the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, and the United States. So in many ways, this is a dialogue program, a track 3 people-to-people diplomacy initiative. Now, from my perspective, I think it's interesting to look at the evolution of how people are getting their information about the world. If you look at the broadcast era, your friends, your family, they certainly influence the way you look at the outside world, there's no question. But in terms of the information that you got about what's happening in Europe, Asia, Middle East, the vast majority of that information came through the BBC, the ABC News, the big institutions of the world that really, in large part, dictated the flow of information that you receive. Now, in this day and age, the information age, we're inundated with, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, we have access to all of these different sources. So if an individual so decides, they can reach a number. And I'd just like to make one additional comment from our point of view as to the power of this quote-unquote track 3 diplomacy. I think the nature of power today is fundamentally changing. I personally don't think the value of these events is exclusively its ability to influence the track 2 or track 1 diplomacy. I think there's an added significance to what we're doing here today in initiatives like this. I think if you look at over the last 150 years or so, every time you see a change in the nature of communication, you see a realignment in the nature of power. So if you look at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, we had a lot of different labor movements being organized. That was in large part a result of much cheaper access to distributing printed information. You had all these pamphlets that were the new means of organizing groups to really reorient the balance of power between labor movements and their bosses. Now, if you look at the civil rights movements, most of these examples are from the States based on sort of my familiarity. I think there's probably parallels around the world. But you look at the civil rights movement in the States, the power of those protests was in large part due to the widespread access to television. Suddenly people can see and feel this. We live in a time in which there's a new medium that is changing the way people can share information and organize. And I think we're going to see similar changes in the way in which people exert their influence. I mean, I think in large part this change in power, many of the more accessible examples of it are, unfortunately, people exerting their ability to destroy or cause harm. I mean, certainly, what is called terrorism is, an example of individuals having enormous power today. Small groups of people can cause significant harm in an unprecedented way. We look at the Danish cartoons. One guy with a pencil, was able to cause enormous harm to people in this part of the world. So many of the examples are unfortunately negative, but I think we're also beginning to see examples of people-powered movements exerting their influence. Here in Egypt, there are plenty of examples, and I'm excited to hear, from the panelists and people in the room some examples of that. So I just want to, close on that, saying that I do think the nature of power as we know it is fundamentally changing with the advent of this new medium. And so I think that there's a real role for this track 3 diplomacy in that sense as well.
Thank you. Ms. El-Katatney, would you please comment on the question?
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, so I work as a staff writer in Egypt Today and Business Today Egypt. They're sister publications. They're both monthly magazines. They come out every month, obviously. As print journalism, we've started, there's a website now. It's for like 3-4 years. You can actually read the magazines online. But definitely the fact that we're a monthly magazine means that we focus more on investigative feature articles rather than news. In recent times period, I see that a lot of people are turning to, there's lots, as we're saying, lots of different ways to get information out. There's the internet, there's blogs, there's, you can have the click of your fingers, you can reach any